Be sure to click the subscribe button for another episode of Hot Mic with Randy Houston and Dave Hogan.
Richard Hurley, a mountain man, a music man, and he's got so many great stories about performing and writing songs about our mountains of North Carolina that we wanted to have him back for episode number 2. Thanks for downloading Hot Mic with Houston and Hogan. Welcome back to Hot Mic with Houston and Hogan. I'm the Houston part of this equation.
And this is Dave Hogan. Happy to be with you again, Randy. And we convinced our old friend Richard Hurley to come back and spend a little more time with us.
We got plenty of music from Richard Hurley to play for you. Richard, we appreciate you taking time to come visit with us today.
Well, I tell you what, I'm flattered to be back here. I really appreciate what you guys do. You got a great program, man. I tell you. Everybody in the world ought to be listening to this show.
Thank you. We enjoy. We're two old broadcasters, and we're full of stories, and some of them are true, and some of them.
Well, you know, I was an old DJ years ago myself.
Yeah, I want to
60 years ago.
I always preface the story by saying, to the best of my memory.
Well, tell us, Richard, about the best of your memory. You started out in high school in radio, right?
I did. Back in 1963, WPTL over in Canton, 920 AM, started up in August of 63. And I remember my senior English teacher called me in after class one day and said, this new station is looking for a kid to bring in the high school audience. And my late brother had worked at the other radio station there in Canton. So long story short, I went over and talked to the guy that owned it, and he hired me, and I started a little rock and roll show, and that's when Louie Louie first came on. I was playing that, the races and all that. But anyway, I had an interesting few years there in the radio business, and up before I went in the service, after I finished at Chapel Hill, I went and had to go to the service there. And during the NOM era, I worked there full time.
Did you actually work at the opposite radio station of your brother? Were you guys on the air opposite each other?
No, he was ahead of me, and he was already was off to college and different things after that. But we did we both were. In fact, my little brother, younger brother, 3 of us boys. The younger brother followed me at PTL.
Are you serious?
High school.
I love that story.
Richard, what did you major in college?
Majored in business administration at Chapel Hill, and then when I got out of the service, I went to work with Square D Company here in Asheville, and I had a 34-year career there in human resources, and great company, great place to work. And
that's where we met.
Yeah,
that's right. In your position there. Run into Richard.
Randy is over there trying to get a job.
That's exactly, keep that guy. Yeah.
Well, we did a little advertising back in those days, looking for people, certainly did.
Yeah, Square D was a great organization, big employer in Buncombe County.
We had almost 1,400 people at one time at division headquarters, marketing, engineering, 2 plants. It was huge.
Yeah. Yep. Over in the Emma.
Yep. We're not too far from Radio Ranch over there.
Exactly. And right around the corner from the Emma International Airport.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
There was a little landing strip over there, and you'd be sitting in the control room at 570, and it faced the antenna field, and you would see a small plane go right behind one of the towers. I mean, it looked like that plane was going to crash. And if you didn't know what was going on, he was going down to a little grass field over in Emma, and we always used to kid about the Emma International Airport.
I mentioned Jimmy Childress on the program when we were talking to Brian and Barry Lee. Jimmy, one of the first jobs I ever had in radio was with Jimmy in Murphy, and he also built a station in Silva and sent me over there. Somebody was on vacation. I don't remember the exact circumstances, but there was a railroad track right by the radio station.
Yeah.
And
Still
if you were on the air when that train came by, you couldn't hear yourself. I think they moved the studios to a different location. But, okay, the Ballad of Old Fort Mountain, I understand, Richard, is what kind of got you started in the music business?
It got me started in the entertaining side of it. I had written a few songs back when I was in college, and about 79 or thereabouts, 78, I was coming up Old Fort Mountain with three other guys. When I was at Square D, we'd been on a business meeting in Marion, I think it was, and we were cresting Old Fort Mountain, and the radio was on. It was a rainy day, and it just like as happenstance would be, the radio announcer said Old Fort Mountain's claimed another life because another truck driver had wrecked going down the mountain. And I thought to myself, Old Fort Mountain's made a widow of a wife. And then I went home and I wrote this song, and I would play it at parties and whatnot. And people said, you ought to record that. And I said, well, I'd be a waste of time and effort. And one day I said, I'm not going to look back 10 years from now and say, what if? So I called up the legendary late Raymond Fairchild, the king of the banjo players, who was a good friend of mine. I used to put him on my program at PTL years ago, and then called Arvil Freeman, the legendary mountain fiddler, and the Crow brothers that played with Raymond. And the five of us got together and went to Eddie Swan's studio there. It was called West Sound Shop at the time.
Ravenscroft Drive.
Yeah, Ravenscroft
downtown
Drive.
Asheville.
Exactly. Yeah. Was where Eddie's studio was. And we walked in there, and I kicked it off, the little guitar run, and Raymond and those guys jumped in there. And, man, I tried to get them to rehearse. I said, we got to rehearse. And they said, don't worry about it. So they're geniuses, So here's what came out of that.
Old Fort Mountain has claimed another life. Old Fort Mountain's made a widow of a wife. Old Fort Mountain's made an orphan of a child. Old Fort Mountain should be called the Devil's Mile. A long-haul man left Knoxville town to make the Raleigh run. His rig was fully loaded as he fought the eastern sun. His destination, Raleigh, was many miles away. Home for old Dave Johnson was Red Carolina clay.
That five-string banjo is prominent there.
I tell you, Raymond Fairchild, like I said, we didn't practice the time. We'd never played it together at the time. And we cut loose of that thing, and we did about 3 cuts and went home. But old Raymond, he was something. He said, Richard says, I think you got a hit on your hands. So I said, well, Raymond, that's awful nice. Well, it got a lot of airplay, and kind of got me out performing. And then, I went from there, started playing up at the Pisgah Ranch, and played there for about 17 years as an after-dinner entertainer. Of course,
really?
I still do shows.
Oh, that's one of mine and Dave's favorite hangouts, or used to be.
And it's going to be a state park.
And I'm glad about that.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Well, I did an after-dinner show there every other Friday night for 17 years during the season. It was a family show, and just had a lot of fun with that.
When I think of Old Fort Mountain, there's a photo that really makes an impression on me. It's hard to describe how dramatic that photograph is, but it was made when they were building the railroad across Old Fort Mountain.
Yeah.
And it's a lineup of prisoners in their prison garb.
Oh, yeah.
Who worked on that railroad.
For nothing.
And somebody wrote a story. I can't remember who wrote the story about that, and talked about the fact that prisoner labor was used in a lot of road work, particularly.
Swannanoa Tunnel's another one.
Yeah. And they'd get these prisoners out of prison to go work. And if there was an accident, one of them died, and that happened pretty often, they'd just bury them in a common grave somewhere, and their relatives would never know what happened to them.
Sad.
And at the base of Old Fort Mountain on the eastern side is thought to be one of those mass grave sites, and they are involved now using cadaver dogs and so forth in trying to document who is buried in there. I read there was an extensive article in the Asheville Citizen about that a couple of years ago.
I think John Boyle wrote that.
Maybe John Boyle,
I think you're right. But that morning we recorded that back in 81. It was August the 12th of 81. Arvil Freeman, he one of the greats, he's gone too, but Arvil Freeman, he went in there, and after we'd done it, he said, I'm going to go back and do some double fiddling on that. So he went back in and put some extra fiddle work on it. And of course, the Crow brothers worked with Raymond for many years, and they're still out there as a gospel duet, doing great work out in the bluegrass world. But had some heavy hitters there helping us out.
Yeah, and of course Raymond played at Stomping Grounds in Maggie Valley. That was his home turf, wasn't it?
Yeah, he had his own little studio eventually, his own little listening venue. It was called the Maggie Valley Opry House.
Uh-huh.
And he would have some big names come in there. I think Tony Rice, may have played there. He and Tony were big buddies. But anyway, he had a lot of good names come through there.
You remember the name Hubert Hayes?
Yep.
When Hubert Hayes died, I took over as the MC of the Mountain Youth Jamboree.
Oh, yeah.
The Mountain Youth Jamboree, which was started by Hubert Hayes, and Mrs. Hayes, Leona, carried it on after his death. And we went over to Sidmouth, England, to a folk festival, and Arvil went with us. We took a band over there, and we took square dancers over there to this international music festival that was held in Sidmouth, England. And I got to MC that program that we did over there. We were over there for about a week doing a lot of different sites with the band and the floggers and square dancers. I think it was 30 some odd of us that went over there. And one of the chaperones, if you will, was Dr. Clint Border from Haywood County.
I know where this story's going.
And he brought the idea of that festival to Haywood County
Called
Folkmoot. Folkmoot. Yeah.
I worked as an MC for them for years and years, and was on their board and been real involved with it.
Clint's gone too, isn't he?
Yeah, he died years ago. Yeah.
And of course, Arvil Freeman, I got to plug the old Madison County boy, his family. And that's so prominent in these mountains. This family, if the music is in the family, they're all going to play.
Had a brother named Gordon.
Yes.
Great fiddle player.
I knew Gordon well, and all of those guys. They were just incredible musicians.
Yep.
Yeah.
Your first album was called
My Mountains, My Songs.
Your latest album is called?
It's called Cataloochee.
What are some of the songs that are on the Cataloochee album?
The Cataloochee album, the lead song is called Cataloochee, and the project here has got two discs in it. One's the music disc, and one is a DVD about we put together a video after we recorded it, but you can go to my website and find it on the video tab. But the story behind this one was that...
Before you tell the story,
Yeah.
Richard, when you put a podcast on the internet, you never know who's going to be listening and where they're going to be listening. Talk a little bit about Cataloochee and what it would mean if somebody's listening, say, out in California.
Good point. The Great Smoky Mountain National Park was established in 1935, but in 1839, a lot of folks had wandered into the Cataloochee Valley, which is part of the Great Smoky Mountains. And there's on the eastern, the North Carolina side, on the Tennessee side, you got Cades Cove over there, which is well known. So these folks were in there from almost 100 years, and they basically kind of eased them out to start the park. But a lot of the old homes are still there. A number of the old homes, they have a reunion every year. Ever since they left, they have a reunion every year. And a friend of mine, Steve Woody, is kind of, I kid him and call him the mayor of Cataloochee, but he presides over a little service they have, and he asked me to come and join him. Just said, come be with us. So I did. And he introduced me. He says, now, Richard writes songs. And he said, you may know him. He's an old Haywood boy. He says, I'll let him come to our reunion. Good-naturedly, he said that. He says, we might let him come back if he'll write a song about Cataloochee. What do you folks think? So we wrote the song, sang it live the next year, and here it is, Cataloochee.
Cataloochee, where the springtime flowers bloom, where warm sun shines brightly on a summer afternoon, where autumn paints the valley of kinfolk long deceased, 'neath snowy winter skies. Folks lived there in peace. By 1839, first settlers wandered in. Proud and strong the women, leather tough the men. They plowed the ground and farmed the earth. Children lent a hand. They paved the way.
Cataloochee.
And Cataloochee's now known as a ski resort, too.
Yeah.
That's up above that. That's above the valley.
Yeah,
That's
but
a
the
whole
name
separate
Cataloochee,
place.
a lot of people
That's
would
right.
connect with the ski resort.
Right, but this is the valley down there. But after we did the song, I talked to Eddie. I said, Eddie, you know, we ought to do a video. So we went out and we pulled all these old pictures from the internet of the black and white pictures and some color from the 1800s and 1900s to make my little 5-minute video. So we were very proud of that.
You know, my daughter and I, Gina, when she visited one time, she grew up in Asheville when I was working there in her formative years, and she wants to go places. And we drove up to Cataloochee, the valley, when she was visiting one time, and it's really the church, you know, the little white church.
That's where this was all started. It was in that church.
Yeah, that reunion.
Palmer Chapel.
Right. Okay. If you want to get off the beaten path, that's the place to go.
You're talking about the name Cataloochee. A mutual friend, Darren Nicholson, played with Mark Pruitt with the Balsam Range for so long.
Darren played the fiddle on this song.
On this song?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, he says he's got this story about where he's from, Tuckasegee.
Right.
And he said, which is Indian for no cell service.
That sounds like Darren. Well, just for what it's worth, on this album, if I might mention it, some of the names besides I mentioned Darren, the genius David Johnson's on there. And,
another genius.
Yeah,
Yes.
Tim Surratt, that's the bass player for Balsam Range, is on this album. Tony Creasman, I mentioned earlier, is on there, and David Holt's on here. Bobby Hicks, 10-time Grammy Award winner, played in that great bluegrass band with Tony Rice and those guys. Josh Goforth's on. Darren got some heavy hitters. Like I told people, I said I wrote the songs and sang the songs, and I also wrote the checks.
Tim does a radio show.
He does.
On WPTL.
Yeah.
Twice a week, I believe.
He does. Yeah.
And
Yes.
Bobby Hicks just turned 90.
You're exactly right.
He's still doing his thing down at Zuma in downtown Marshall on a Thursday night. They have an open mic show down there, and Bobby always shows up and plays the fiddle. You wrote a song about special needs children.
Yeah. That's one of my favorites. I try to sing this one in my shows. I was over at Irene Wortham Christmas time some years back and ran into a friend of mine that I worked with at Square D, and I was volunteering over there. And she said, I said, what you doing? She said, well, I came pick up my son. Well, that resonated. I remembered years ago this lady had a special needs son, and I met him, and I had seen him there over the years when I was actually doing Santa Claus for him. I'm a skinny Santa, but anyway. So I went home that Christmas Eve, and I woke up the next morning and wrote this song. And the other part of it is that when, as a kid, we had a special needs kid in our Cub Scout pack. And, as a little child, you'll see a special needs kid and say, well, Mama, why does that boy look so different? Little kids will blurt out stuff like that.
Sure.
And I remember my mother used to say, son, those are God's special children. And that just made everything right.
Let's
and that's
play a little bit of that.
What this song's about.
One day when I was a young little boy, I went out with Alan to play. He barely could walk and he struggled to talk. Sometimes he just stared far away. I said, Mama, why can't Alan play just like me? I can walk, I can talk, and I can see. She said, son, he's just different. He's different, you see. He'll never be like you. And
then it goes on to talk about God's special children.
Powerful.
Yeah.
Powerful.
Thank you.
Here in the mountains of North Carolina and East Tennessee, a lot of folks get carried away in the church house, and they brought in snakes.
Oh, my goodness. You know, a fella introduced me one time. I was a guest speaker. In fact, it was Charles Frazier, the author, who wrote the book called Mountain. It was his dad who was my high school principal.
Yeah, I knew them. Knew him,
And
Charles.
over in Franklin, after leaving Andrews, where I grew up, and he was the principal over there, he moved over to Macon County in Franklin. And he called me one day and had me come over there. And I'd been to Russia, and he read about it in the paper. They did a story. And called me and asked me to come over there and make a talk about my trip to a civic club. He introduced me and said, Dave is from Charles' dad, talked kind of slow like I do. And he said, Dave is so far back in the hills where he was raised that even the Methodists are snake handlers.
That's far back.
So tell us about that tune.
Well, it's pretty generic from the standpoint. It's not about any particular incident, but there have been snake handling incidents around the mountains over the years. And one day I just sat down and decided it needed a song, and I wrote this song, and I call it The Snake Handling Preacher. Old Preacher Dan was a snake handling man.
That old-time religion.
In the Appalachian Mountains, I remember all too well the story about a man of God who could save your soul from hell. He preached the good book daily, from the pulpit he would shout, "You best believe the words I read and turn your life about." He took Jesus as his Savior many years ago. A lad of barely 21, he felt that inward glow.
Well, of course, we all remember Wendy Bagwell and the Sunlighters, don't we?
Yeah. Where do you want that door?
That's right. Well, you know, Darren and I are good friends. Darren in his program will talk about, says, I haven't been to church since my snake died.
He's funny.
Great talent and wonderful person. I just think the world of him.
He's an incredible mandolin player.
Oh, man. And guitar player?
Yes.
Oh, he's a great guitar player, too.
Tell us about the Booger.
The Boojum. Yeah, that's on
Boojum?
that's on the Cataloochee album. And the Boojum was Haywood County's version of Sasquatch. And and Pat Smathers was the mayor of Canton at that time, and he called me up one day and said, Richard, we're going to have a Boojum festival. And I said, a what?
A what?
He said, a Boojum festival. And I didn't know much about it at the time, and he clued me in. I went on the internet and learned a little something about it. But I said, well, and he wanted me to come MC the event, and it was in 16, I guess it was. So I thought, well, we need a song for this festival. So I sat down one day after doing my research, and I wrote this song. And it's interesting that this particular song, for whatever reason, the kids get into this.
Really?
Now, a couple of guys that I've given these albums to said, my little granddaughter, every time she gets in the car and we take her to school, she's got to hear the Boojum song in the afternoon. She's got to hear the Boojum song. And I've heard that from a number of parents. I don't know what it is about it. Maybe it's the rhythm or whatever, the sound of the name Boojum, but anyway, that's the legend of the Boojum. That's the Haywood's version of Sasquatch.
All right, let's listen in for a little clip.
His home is Haywood County, where the Balsam Mountains peak. Near shining rock black balsam, old mountain so steep, you could hear his mournful moan near the trail when you walk. You could see the laurels rustling, you could feel the Boojum stalk. Hoarding gems and precious stones found high on mountain ground, he stores them in old liquor jugs in caves that can't be found. He fills each jug with pertinent juice.
Richard, I'm a mountain boy through and through, and I just appreciate these songs about the mountains of North Carolina.
I appreciate it.
I was just wondering as we listened to that if Boojum and Sasquatch and Bigfoot are related. Are they kin to each other?
I think they are. Depends on what part of the country you're in. They call them different things, but yeah,
And
we had
there's
some fun with that song.
restaurant and bar in downtown Waynesville.
That's right. Of course, the way where that came from, if you go to Lake Logan, which I know you all know Lake Logan in Haywood County,
Right.
back in the days when Champion had that property, they had a little, I called a speakeasy, a little place they called the Boojum Cave.
Oh,
And it
okay.
was a little bar sort of area to entertain their customers and VIPs. And there's a big, huge picture painting of what the Boojum looked like. And that same painting as reproduction is in that restaurant you're talking about.
Randy,
in
next
Waynesville.
time you come over to visit me,
Yeah.
Lake Junaluska in Waynesville, Haywood County, we'll go to the Boojum.
I want to go. It's spelled Boojum. Is
That's
that
it,
right?
the Boojum.
Boojum.
Yeah.
Love these mountain stories. Well, you wrote another song called "The Leaning Side."
Yeah, the leaning side. Eddie and I were working on some stuff, and he and his wife and I went out to lunch one day from the studio, and Linda, his wonderful wife, said, I wish somebody'd write a song about the leaning side. And I said, the leaning side? You mean kind of like an old barn leans to the side? She said, yeah, maybe something like that. So I it was on a Friday. I remember distinctly on a Friday. And about 3 o'clock in the morning, I woke up and I just grabbed my pad and pencil and I wrote this song and then recorded it. I woke up the next morning and had me a song written. But
It's amazing how that happened.
yeah, it is. I had to revise it some, obviously, but then we recorded it, and after we did it, David Johnson did the music on it, that you're going to hear right now. But after we did that, when I went and recorded the main album, I wanted to do another version of it, so we got two different versions. We got kind of a modern version, but the one we want to do is the old timey version. It's kind of the Mother Maybelle sound to it with the guitar picking and all that. David kind of used my guitar licks to put it together. He's a much better guitar player than I am, obviously. But anyway, I was real proud of the music he put on this.
All right, let's listen in to The Leaning Side.
Sometimes when life gets a little bit too hard and there ain't no resting place to find, I think about a farm up in the Burnett Cove where my granny plowed the mountainside with pride. Now she raised 6 kids when her husband up and died, and the old frame house now seems mighty small. Granny's long gone and the weeds are so tall, and the old red barns I lean into one side.
Like the old red barn, we need a little help sometimes. So prop us up, oh Lord, up on the leaning side.
Oh, I love it.
I love it.
Did you say Burnett Cove in there?
You know where Dutch Cove is?
I think I'm in the right.
The Dutch Cove is where, where Morning Star Church is
Yeah,
up there? Well,
yeah.
if you go on up, that is the Dutch Cove. It veers off. It's now called Turnpike Road.
Okay.
But that was the Burnett Cove.
Burnett Cove.
And that's where my roots are. My mother was born in 1904 up in Little Cove, no electricity, no plumbing.
Wow.
One of 6 kids. And then her dad died in 1912 when she was 8. So my grandmother, that's basically about her, but it's a little gospel tune.
Yeah.
But the other version, like I said, that number 5, see what I did, David and I did that in 16, and then when we did this album in 21, I wanted the group, it was Tim Surratt and David Johnson.
Get a little closer.
This is not on, is it?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
Well, that's all right. Not a problem. Keep talking.
Well, yeah, that leaning side that you just heard was David Johnson did all the music on it. So when Eddie and I, that was in 16, when Eddie and I did the album in 21, I guess it was, I wanted to ask the musicians, the professional musicians that did all the other music on this Catalucci song to hear what they would put around it.
On that song.
And so when you hear the other version of it, It's dun, 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 dun. It's kind of a jazz. It's a jazz. If you want to hear a little,
you want
to
play a little bit?
Yeah,
of
a little. It's different. It's a little jazzy. Sometimes when life gets a little bit too hard and there ain't no resting place to find, I think about a farm up in the Burnett Cove where my granny plowed the mountainside with pride. Now she raised 6 kids when her husband up and died, and the old frame house now seems mighty small. Granny's long gone and the weeds are so tall, and the old red barn's a leaning to one side.
Oh,
see the difference? So people say, why'd you put the same song on there twice? And I said, well, go listen to them.
Yeah.
They're totally different
Totally
songs.
different.
But Eddie told me, said he brought in, like say Tim and David Johnson, a couple other guys, Tony Creasman. He says, Richard said, when we record this album, don't say to them, now this song sounds like Don Gibson, because they'll go that direction. So just leave them alone. Let them do their thing. And that's what came out of that. When they took that song, they didn't hear the David Johnson version.
David Johnson is a genius. He brings an aura. He brings a feeling to every song he's recorded. The dobro work that he does is haunting. He is haunting. Tim Surratt at one of the Balsam Range Christmas shows, I guess the year before last, introduced. They had a couple of people like Creasman and also David there. And when he introduced David Johnson, he said, David Johnson back here on the steel said Tony Rice said he was the greatest all around musician he'd ever worked with. I have to agree. I've emceed and seen shows all my life, but David Johnson, when you're in his presence, you are in the presence of an incredible talent from up in Ashe County, up in the high mountains. Yep. Yeah. Well, this album, he does all he plays the banjo, he plays the fiddle, the guitar, the dobro. He just lays down one, picks up another. He's incredible to see. And I've at Eddie's studio had the opportunity to watch him. Guys, I wish we could talk all day, and we about have.
One thing that I want to mention before we sign off this podcast that folks can find on the internet, and they'll enjoy it, is Richard doing live Old Mountain Dew from at the Shindig on the Green, right? It's on there somewhere probably. Yeah, I found it on there not too long ago. And that's a good story about Old Mountain Dew, the song, Give Me That Old Mountain Dew, because Bascom Lamar Lunsford, whom we've talked about on the podcast, he wrote not the tune, I think it comes from Ireland or somewhere, but he wrote the original lyrics to Mountain Dew in the 20s. And then in 1935, I believe it was, Bascom and Scotty Wiseman were talking up at a folk festival in Chicago. Remember the National Barn Dance? Not that you would have been around to hear it, but you know the history. One of the first radio shows that was on a Clear Channel radio station and really was the inspiration for the Grand Ole Opry was the National Barn Dance on WLS in Chicago. So Bascom and Scotty Wiseman were friends, and they needed a song, Lulabelle and Scotty Wiseman, for an album, and Scotty wrote different lyrics to Mountain Dew. As I heard the story from Bascom's daughter, Jo, Bascom needed some money to get back from Chicago to Western North Carolina. And Scotty paid him $25, which would be a lot of money today, maybe $500 today, for the song Mountain Dew. Mainly, he just bought the title. And he wrote different words to it for the most part. But, and this is a true story, the song had never been copyrighted, and Scotty Wiseman copyrighted it, and he made sure that as long as Bascom Lamar Lunsford lived, he would get half the royalties to Mountain Dew. And that song's been recorded beaucoup of times, and I'm sure it's
Paid off
responsible.
well. Yeah.
I guess for Scotty and Lulabelle and Scotty, Have I Told You Lately That I Love You is the biggest money maker for them that Scotty wrote, recorded by everybody from Gene Autry to Elvis Presley. Have I told you lately that I love you?
When I do Mountain Dew at the festival or the shindig, I always preface it by saying, you folks out in the audience from all over the country that are here, you've probably heard this song, but you probably didn't know it was born in Buncombe County.
Richard, I can't tell you how much we appreciate you taking time to come visit with us on Hot Mic with Houston and Hogan. You get our podcast wherever you download your podcast at all of the Spotify and Apple iTunes and all of that. And I know there's going to be a lot of Richard Hurley fans downloading this podcast and enjoying our conversation as much as Dave and I have.
Well, I'll tell you what, I'm so flattered that you all let me come here. And if folks are interested in some of my music, just go to Richard Hurley Music. That's Hurley, richardhurleymusic.com, and check out all the tabs on there. You might find hopefully find something of interest to you.
I'm sure they will.
Thank you so much, guys.
Dave, I'll see you the next time we do another Hot Mic with Houston and Hogan right here on our radio station. I guess we call this, huh? This is mine and your radio station.
Studio R. R for Randy.
Thank you both. We appreciate you. Hot Mic with Houston and Hogan.
Be sure to click the subscribe button for another episode of Hot Mic with Randy Houston and Dave Hogan.